Just over a year ago, I purchased my very own small woodland here in the UK. It's something I've been wanting to do for over 10 years now, ever since I've been running a YouTube channel that focuses on bushcraft and survival and camping and just general outdoor things. In the past, I'd always had permission from landowners to be able to use their woodlands for these sorts of things. Even though these are fantastic woodlands and I still have access to them, I just never quite felt 100% comfortable whilst doing the bushcraft and general videos there. And so for the last 6 years I'd had enough money saved up to purchase my own small woodland here in the UK. And the reason it took me so long is because despite the fact that woodlands were widely available, most of them were either on a really steep slope or they were near a really fast road. And because I do filming, these things were important to me, that it needed to be on a relatively flat land, but also not be near a fast road where there was tons of noise that the camera would then pick up. And so I was patient and I waited, and eventually I stumbled across this small woodland here in the south of the UK, which has a perfect mixture of beech, ash, oak, hazel, and a few more trees and shrubs, as well as the ground floor, bluebells, wood anemone, wild garlic, and it constantly changes throughout the year. I've been doing bushcraft and outdoor survival skills for most of my life really. But this was a journey that's something totally different. This was more about being a steward of a piece of land, because this woodland is going to be here way after I'm gone. And I feel like it's almost my duty to be able to look after it and care for it in a way that helps to benefit the future of the woodland and to try and protect it. And so over the past year, I've been on this journey into woodland management, which has shown me totally new skills and given me a different understanding of woodlands and forests and how they actually work and contribute towards nature and biodiversity. One of the first things I did when I purchased the woodland was to take a walk around. I bought my dog Jax and I came on a lovely autumn day and we just walked around the woods. I looked at the trees, I tried to document what species of trees I had, how many of them, the various conditions of some of them, and being winter it was easy to see which ones were quite damaged and maybe needed managing, but also to gauge the boundaries and the state of the boundaries, which were in a bit of disrepair at the time, and it was just a dilapidated barbed wire fence that divided my woodland with the surrounding and neighbouring fields. During that time it helped me reflect on how far I'd actually come in my life and career throughout YouTube, and the journey I'd taken from going as an ex-teacher to being able to purchase a small piece of woodland to manage in the UK. And it made me realise how fortunate I am to have people like yourselves watching the videos and helping to support that journey along the way, and for that I'll always be really grateful. Once I'd got a good idea of the woodland itself and the layout of the land, I then put together a management plan for the following year and potential 5 years in the future. I just roughly wrote this out on a piece of paper and did it in much more detail once I got home. But essentially I wanted to help rejuvenate the woodland and do various traditional woodland crafts along the way and help promote some of these traditional crafts and woodland management practices to you guys, and to help keep that knowledge going and keep it alive. Once I'd formulated a management plan, I then came out with some trail cameras, some wildlife cameras, because I'd known about the tree species and the various flora that was around, but I had no idea of what actual fauna, what animals and birds occupied this woodland. And so I put various trail cameras around the woodland and I left them up for months on end. And it was really nice to see how rich the wildlife was here, with roe deer, muntjac deer, badger, fox, hare, tawny owls, buzzards. There was just so much wildlife that I hadn't been able to see on the days that I came here at daylight, but at night, and obviously on times when no one was here in the woodland, the whole woodland just came alive. And that was really amazing to see, and I'm really pleased that I did get those cameras and I put them around and I moved them around various different places. It gave me a really good understanding of how other animals are using the woodland. There were a few really old oak trees here that marked a pretty old boundary, and some of them had ivy growing up them, and I know ivy is really beneficial to species such as bees because they have berries almost throughout the year and long into winter. But some of these oak trees are really, really old, and they actually help to contribute to thousands of different species. And so I did remove the ivy of some of them, not all of them, but just to help prolong the life of the oak tree, more so because the ivy wasn't actually killing the oak tree itself, but it's where they were facing strong winds. The ivy acts as like a canopy, because the tree, although it sheds its leaves, it then has the ivy still there, which catches all the wind, and it can actually make some of the older trees blow over. After a few weeks had gone, I then decided it was time to spend the first night here in the woodlands, and so I brought my canvas Lavoo tent and a wood stove, and it was deep into autumn at the time, and it was so nice to be able to do the first ever camping trip here, and I'll put a link to that video in the description box below. But it allowed me to not only spend a peaceful night camping, which I absolutely love anyway, it just allowed me to experience the woodland at dawn, at dusk, at night time, and hear all the various animals that were coming out. I could hear the tawny owls, I could hear the deer crunching on the leaves, and it was just a really nice experience, and it's hopefully one of many different camping experiences that I can have here throughout the years, especially once I bring my family along, once the kids are a little bit older. It was actually just this spot here, just behind me, that I set up the camp. It's in one of my favourite areas of the woodland, which is the beach area. There's really not much growing on the floor, so it's really nice for camping, but at the same time, at that particular time of year, all of the leaves in the canopy were oranges and yellows and reds, and it was just casting an incredible colour across the woodland. Not only did it make it great for filming, but it made for a really nice camping experience. And I'm always aware with beech trees that they can drop their branches all of a sudden, and it can be quite dangerous. But I made sure to look up for any potential dangerous branches and overhanging branches, and I pitched my tent in an area that was clear of those. But it was an amazing night, and I still come back to this particular area of the woodland really regularly, and it's something that I've not touched at all in terms of management practices. I've just left it as it is, and it's not changed much really, because there's so much cover from the trees that are blocking the light in the ground. There's not much kind of change here, so I feel there's no point in me doing any management really here. And so it's nice, because this is a part of the woodland that's never really going to change. It was also the main part of the reason that I bought this woodland in the first place, was this incredible stretch of beech trees. I'm a massive fan of beech woodlands, and the mixture of oak and ash with it as well, yeah, it's really good. And this is probably one of my favourite places in the woodland too. Although my knowledge of bushcraft and survival and general outdoor skills was good, my actual knowledge of woodland management and forestry practices was actually really minimal. And so I got in touch with a friend of mine called Ryan. He's a tree surgeon or an arborist, and he does this day in, day out. He manages woodlands, he manages trees for people. He's very good with a chainsaw. And so he came out and he did a recce, and he walked the woodland with me, and we chose various trees that looked precarious. A few of them were dead standing beech trees, which could have been quite dangerous and fall. And there was also this oak tree here next to me, which is lovely and straight, but it was actually hung up diagonally in some other oak trees nearby, and it was across the path that I normally walk up in. And so it had to come down, and it was really interesting to learn from Ryan the different techniques that he uses with the different chainsaws. He had a small one, and then he had a larger one, and it was just really good to watch him in his element and seeing a professional just make such easy work of it. But it was really good to have Ryan pass on that knowledge in the episodes. Again, I'll link them below. And it was something that was new to me. To be honest, I didn't have the expertise with chainsaws and climbing trees, and so it was something that was beyond my skill set. But it is something I'd like to learn down the line, and I will go on courses and get the best practices in and up my skills where I can, so that I can do some of these things myself. As for the oak tree here, I decided to leave it as it is at the moment, and Ryan suggested we put some of the cut top sections of it underneath before we fell it, so that it stays up off the ground and it doesn't break down as fast, and that way if I need to use any of this wood for various projects, we can still cut it up with a chainsaw and it will be less rotten than if it was on the floor. There are some other smaller sections of it too, but I'm not sure what to do with them yet, whether to use them for a bit of firewood or some other wood carving projects. So many of you recognise this large tree stump behind me, and it's actually what I call the giant ash tree, which is a very big feature of the woodland. It was something that stood out as soon as I walked in here. I could see it stretching all the way across this part of the woodland, and it had taken out some large hazel trees and some other large ash trees as well. It was already here, blown over by the time I purchased the woodland, so I wasn't sure how long it had been there, and I wasn't sure how usable any of the wood would be. So to begin with, I did things slowly, and I just trimmed off some of the tips of the branches that I could do with the small chainsaw that I had, and I began to stack those as firewood, ready for the following season or 2 seasons. This was probably the first bit of management that I'd actually done myself and started myself, and I'd put up a temporary tarp and kind of miniature bushcraft camp as an area where I could stop and have tea and lunch in between doing the forestry work. But it was a really rewarding time because there was no pressure on having to do anything, there was no time constraints. It was just me in the woodland doing forestry things and not having to think about too much, which is really nice in this day and age where life is all about rushing and how fast you can get things done. For me, it was just being in the moment and just enjoying time here in the woods. If I'm honest, I was really in 2 minds about what to do with this ash tree. I didn't know whether to leave it here as a natural feature of the woodland because it did look so majestic. And I actually did leave it here for many weeks throughout the snow and the rain, and I still didn't know what to do. And I asked some of you what you would do, and a lot of you said to do something with it, make some use of the wood because it is off the ground. It's not directly on the ground, most of the trunk, and so it wouldn't have decayed as fast as it would have if it was entirely on the ground. And so I stewed on that for a few weeks, and I eventually came to the conclusion that it would be nice to do something with the wood. And obviously I have that other oak tree that would contribute to biodiversity, and the other trees that the ash tree had taken out would rot away and contribute to biodiversity for the invertebrates on the floor and the fungi. So I spoke to Ryan again, and he came over, this time with his milling chainsaw, and he taught me various skills and tricks on what to do with that. And we milled the trunks up. We cut them into 3 large sections, and we milled them into 2-inch planks, 1 to 2 inch planks, and then I stacked them and placed spaces under each one so that the airflow could get through them and they could dry much more evenly and they wouldn't hold water. This took probably just over a day, day and a half, and it was the first proper bit of management that I'd done here in the woodland, or at least Ryan had done. Once the planks had been milled up, Ryan then showed me how he could make various 4x4 inch posts from one of the trunk sections, and this was something I'd never seen done before, certainly with a chainsaw. And I've still got those posts and I've used them for various projects, and I do plan to use them in the future, not just here in the woodland but back home as well for various woodland projects and craft stuff. But I do have to admit that once the tree was gone and I could see the bare ground, a part of me did miss it, and there was a little bit of regret at the time, thinking, you know, what the woodland looks so different. I think that's what it was. It was so suddenly so much more open, and I wasn't quite used to that because this tree was such a big feature. And so yeah, part of me did regret that. But early on, before Ryan had milled the tree up, I did make a small coffee scoop. I carved a small coffee scoop from one of the tips of the branches, which I still use to this day. And that moment made me realise that it was the right choice, because this large root section here is still a lovely feature, and it will always be here, and it will rot down over the years, but it's also serving as a reminder as to the magnificent ash tree that was here. And it really was probably the biggest ash tree that I had certainly seen. I didn't get it aged, but we tried to count some of the rings, and it was probably, I think, 89 or 90 years old. So it was really impressive to see something like that. Just a shame it had blown down in the wind. Sadly, all the ash trees here are affected by ash dieback, and the tips are starting to die, they're starting to blister and burst in the bark, and these will come down naturally in the winds and the storms that we have each year. But again, another management choice was whether to cut them down and just use the wood straight away, or to let them go naturally. And because of what we did to this tree, I decided, certainly for this past year, or the first year of owning the woodland, to just leave these trees be, and if they fall down, they fall down. And then it was on to what we decided to do with the wood that had been made and milled up. And so we come to probably the most significant part of the woodland management that I did, and I decided to use the ash planks pretty much straight away after they'd been milled, because they were in good condition. They'd dried out. I think I left them maybe 4 weeks to 6 weeks. But I wanted to do a project with Dad, a father and son project again, like we did with the pallet wood cabin. And we decided to make this woodland storage. It's a storage shelter, really. I made the foundation from some of the 4x4 ash posts that Ryan had milled up, and I put it on some logs as well and raised it up off the ground so that that foundation could last for as long as possible. And then we just built up, and we kept it as pretty much a square structure with a relatively flat roof that was slightly angled. It was once we put this ash cladding on that I realised I'd made the right decision with using the wood straight away, and it looked absolutely incredible. I built it in an area of the woodland that really minimised the impact on nature. It's right here in the corner by a field. It overlooks the beach section, and there's carpets of wild garlic and bluebell out in front of it, and there's dotted hazel trees just surrounding it, and it's a really, really peaceful area. And I try to minimise the impact on the woodland itself by keeping it pretty small and building it here in the corner. So I store all the tools in here, the wheelbarrows, lots of firewood as well, and just general any woodland projects that I've been doing I store in here. To be honest, it was a really enjoyable time to do another project with Dad, even though some of it was quite hard work. It was good fun, and we're really pleased with the overall finished project. The actual build project itself took us a few months, because in between I was doing other filming work. It wasn't just up here, it was in different woodlands at the time, and so we took our time making it, and it probably could have been built a lot quicker. But we, like I say, we were pleased with the outcome, and now we can just come here and use it and just enjoy looking at what we'd created. And the ash tree lives on, and you can see it's really got a patina on it now that's kind of blends in a lot more with the woodland. It's a lot less bright than when we put the cladding on, and we didn't put any coating on it. We just left it as it is, and we probably will just leave it as it is, and eventually it will all rot back to nature. But something we're proud of, and it's one to be proud of. Another job I did that winter, because the sap wasn't rising, was some coppicing, and I only did this on small scale, and I put it in my management plan that I only wanted to do it in small segments so as not to massively affect the biodiversity of the woodland, rather than clear fell lots of hazel and have it as a kind of proper big coppice. I wanted to be able to keep that biodiversity level going and not affect nature in too much, and just work around it and alongside it, as opposed to trying to just fight it and dominate. And so the new shoots started to come through that following spring, and they'll continue to come up now and grow quite fast as they get more light. This one here doesn't get too much light because of where the actual woodland storage shelter is, but the other ones that we did have had plenty of light, and they're growing really well now. The small whips are pretty much a metre long, more than a metre long, and we're coming into the second year now of growth, and in about 4 more years they'll be ready to use for hazel hurdles and other traditional woodland craft projects and bushcraft things. So for me, I enjoyed this part a lot because it's about creating a renewable resource, and this is where woodland management comes into its own and links in with bushcraft, because I'm helping to create a resource for the future of the woodland, as opposed to just letting the trees grow wild and fall down and break, and then the stall itself breaks apart and it then doesn't regrow. I'm trying to promote that new growth so as to use some of those resources in 3 to 4 years time for various projects, and then continue to do that on other coppiced areas of hazel, and then hopefully I should have a really nice balance of resources that I can use. And the woodland management side of things has that lovely cycle, and that was one of my goals. And then once the woodland shelter project had been finished, it was still winter time. The sap wasn't rising yet, and I learnt that most of the woodland management practices that you do with forestry and things all tends to be in winter because the trees are dormant, all the sap isn't rising, there's no kind of leaves coming out, you're not affecting the actual progression of nature too much, you're working with it. And so that's when it's a really busy time. And I realised this as I was doing these various management practices, that winter is actually a really busy time for the jobs that you can do in a woodland. And so the next thing that I went down the route of was traditional hedge laying, because although it's not often seen in woodlands, it's mostly done on fields. There's two boundaries, the northern and the eastern boundaries of my woodland are adjacent to a field, and there are sheep in this field and it's a beautiful view, but sometimes the sheep will get through the small electric wire fence that they have, they'll trample it over, and then they'll just walk through the woodland. And whilst I don't mind that really at all, it's part of nature, at the same time further into the spring all the bluebells and the natural flora that have been here for hundreds of years will get trampled by the sheep, and it will definitely have an impact on the layout of the land. And so the boundary itself was also a bit of a mess. Like I say, there was a dilapidated piece of barbed wire which we needed to keep because that was what's down in the deeds and the legal documents as the boundary is the barbed wire. But it was kind of all over the place, and so I met up with the field owner and we both walked the boundary together and decided, you know, the right place to put the barbed wire and keep the traditional boundary that was there. And we agreed that I could help clear the boundary of all my trees that were overhanging and the branches that were overhanging. And that's when I started to do the traditional hedge laying techniques, using hand tools where possible, and to pass on some of that knowledge to you guys as I learnt it. And over that past year, it was really nice to see how much progress it had made. I felt like the stakes and the weavers and the binders, like you see at the top here, kind of give a really nice aesthetic look to the boundary without it looking too much like a man-made fence. It's a much more natural one. But to be able to see the new growth come through from partially cutting a tree to the point where there's enough cambium layer to still pass nutrients up and down through the roots to the branches to grow new shoots, it was incredible to see. And it's probably one of my proudest achievement, is to actually create a living hedge. And this is going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a number of years, and I might have to infill with planting over the next couple of years, planting some hedging species. But most of this hazel has grown really well and it's budding really nicely, and I've just been really impressed that how cool nature can be, that you can partially cut a tree, fold it over, and then within a few weeks that sap rises up and starts to grow new shoots, nice and straight and vertical, and can thicken out and create a hedge. And it was an episode and an experience that I was really proud of, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the progress of this over the next 5 to 6 years, and to see how dense, you know, I can make it. And the idea was that not only was this improving the boundary, but it was actually contributing and creating a much more beneficial wildlife habitat for small mammals and nesting birds. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that progress, like I say, over the next couple of years. And as spring started to turn into summer, I decided to make this ash tree a little bit more of a feature, and instead of having the temporary tarp area as the area where I would cook food and eat lunch and things like that, I decided to make the hub area of the forest here around this tree stump. And so it's nice to have it as a backdrop, and I have a fire pit and some pot hangers and a wood store with some flat areas where I can put pots and pans. And then as the back end of summer came around, I decided to do another project with Dad, which was a clay brick oven, and the clay bricks were over 100 years old. It was another father and son project, and something we really enjoyed doing together, and it was a bit of a labour of love. We'd never built one before, and it was quite a lot harder, and it was a bit of a spontaneous one, and it's nice to have somewhere to cook when it's raining, and you can, you know, if it's torrential rain, you can still easily cook there. And we did cook a few good meals, but part of me does have a little regret with building it because of the nature of how it looks. It doesn't kind of conform as much as I'd like in terms of in the woodland, and it was something that I just wanted to do, and I probably could have done at any point and anywhere. So for me, it was a really good project, and it was fun, and I learnt a lot. But at the same time, you know, it kind of detracted away from the actual woodland management side of things. And so it's nice to do different things. You guys know my channel. I don't always do the same thing. I try and mix things up, and that was definitely a mix things up thing. And it was a great project, and it was a learning curve again, and it was nice to do some new skills and to try and create something with my hands, which I've always been really into. And you guys seem to really enjoy that as well. So that was pretty much it. That was the year wrapped up. And I think, looking back now, I actually did a lot more management than I thought I would. Not just because it was all new to me and I was gung-ho and I really wanted to get involved, but also, I guess, from producing the series, the Woodland Life series for you guys, it was really good motivation for me to try and learn these new management practices and new forestry skills, and just create some really nice educational content for you. In hindsight, part of me would have liked to have taken the year a little bit slower and taken it in a bit more, and perhaps spent more time here almost not filming and just enjoying it as it is, as a woodland. And I think over the next year there might be a little bit less on the certainly the management side, because naturally I filmed a lot of it now already, and it would get repetitive if I filmed it cutting trees every year for firewood and things. But I think it will focus more on allowing me to spend time here, do some things like bushcraft projects, do some camping here, and just, you know, some overnights where I can enjoy it more, not necessarily have to film it all the time, just camping with family, and just watch and study the nature with a little bit more attention. I recently hired some new camera lenses, long range zoom camera lenses, to get a bit more experience on the filming side of trying to capture the nature that is, you know, surrounding me here. And this is a lot more theirs than it is mine. They were here before me, and so, you know, I think this next year I'm going to pay a lot more attention to that and take it all in a bit more, do things a little bit slower, and just, yeah, focus on the nature side of things and the being, I know it sounds really cliche, but being at one with nature. And I think by camping, you can, it's one of the best ways to be at nature, be at one with nature, is being in the elements itself and spending the night out in the woods. Get to get the full experience of what woodland life really is about. But it's been a really incredible journey for this past year. It's just over a year now, and since that time I've also done some tree planting, because where we've had a few trees come down and we had to fell one or two dead ones, it's been really nice to try and rejuvenate that woodland with some different species as well, like the wild service tree, which don't grow here but they are native to the UK. And that's purely because with the climates we've been having and we're going to have in the future, and everything warming up, and the very hot summers, we had a drought last summer, it's important to try and create a more biodiverse woodland so that these species and the layout of the woodland itself can still thrive. Otherwise, if it was all the same species and let's say there was a big drought and it wiped out loads of trees, it would massively affect not just the flora around, but also the animals and the birds that use this woodland. And so, as part of my stewardship, it's important to be able to protect it for the future, and for my kids and the future generations that, you know, come through the woodlands, to be able to keep that going. And I think that's a really big thing. And although it's really hard to look into the future at, you know, the age I am now, and having just owned the woodland, it's quite hard to see that far ahead and think, oh, if I plant that tree now, I'm never really going to see it in its full maturity. I'll be dead before it's fully mature. But it would be my grandkids down the line who get to experience granddad's trees and enjoy them, and hopefully learn from that and continue to do that process. And it's the circle of life, isn't it? And that's really what it's all about. When you take everything back and you strip it all back, that is what woodland management is all about. It's the protection of nature for future generations. And so that's it. Thank you for watching this episode. I do appreciate it. If you would like to watch all of the individual episodes I've done here on woodland life and woodland management, I will put a link in the description below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe, and there's going to be plenty more content based on this coming up in the future. Thank you for all your support over this past year, and if you have any things you want to ask, then pop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.